Are we live? I don't know.
Yes, we're live, Councillor Graham Henson.
So thank you very much. So welcome everyone to our West London Waste Authority Board meeting for December 2020. It's our last meeting of this year, and we're sort of getting ready for Christmas, but it's an important meeting because we set out our budget for the following year. Mick Savies from Ealing has changed his cabinet role at Ealing, so but he's still the delegate to this board until the AGM next year. So, but his new person has come along. So, Mick, did you want to quickly introduce them while you're here?
Oh yes, I'd love to introduce Councillor Jasbir Anand from Ealing Council, who stepped into my shoes in the environment, and now it's changed the portfolio. It's environment and climate action, highlighting how important climate action is in terms of not just the council, but in terms of the world. And Jasbir has got some very big boots, and she's very good at what she does.
Excellent. So thank you very much. Welcome to the meeting today.
Thank you.
So you're coming in as a guest, so you can see meet everyone and see what we're really like. In case Mick's told you something different. Anyway, so we move on to item 1. Apologies for absence. I think everyone's here today. So we move to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest for today? No, if any become available or notifiable during the meeting, if you just let us know and we'll record them at that time. I should remind you that that we're online meeting, so if you do want to contribute to the debate, could you use the hand function so we don't all overtalk each other. And if there's a technical difficulty that affects me, then Mick can take over as the vice chair. If it's the whole meeting collapses, we'll just convene at another time. So thank you very much. And also, could you also put your phones on silent? There's nothing worse than a vibrating phone on an online meeting. Thank you. So we've moved to item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on 25th of September. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
We now move to the, actually it's really one of the key items on the agenda today, which is the draft 21-22 budget for consultation. So can we invite Jay to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The report presents our draft budget for next year. And really what I'll do is I'll run through each section of the budget report and highlight the key points, the key messages. And, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them during the presentation or at the end. So starting with section 1, this sets out the requirements and that the budget is for consultation with boroughs. The report has already been shared with the finance directors and the environment directors, and we've been invited to the West London treasurers on Tuesday, and we'll go through the budget report with them there. Finance directors will feed back their formal responses by early January, and that, together with any amendments to the budget, will be reported to the January meeting, January authority meeting. Excuse me. Section 2 then provides the executive summary, and there's 2 key messages here. The first is that we're really looking to push on with the business plan activities next year, particularly around projects, food and data. And the second is that the biggest driver of growth in the budget is the increased volumes of waste that boroughs have forecast, particularly around residual waste. And in the table in section 2.3, what you'll see is the biggest movements relate to waste transport and disposal and levies, and that's the result of those waste forecasts. You'll also notice that there are some movements for waste for materials recycling facility service costs and service income, and these are pass-through costs. They relate to the service provided to Ealing Council, and they have a nil effect on the bottom line. In section 3, I wanted to provide a sample of the projects that we're looking to push on with. And the scale of the potential savings here is why we're focusing on business plan activities next year. And to give you a bit more detail, the type of work we'll be doing will be to unravel the data. We'll be looking at gathering information, making conclusions, and providing a bit more granular information about some of the opportunities on offer. Okay, and the idea is all of that will be work with boroughs that will help them answer those questions that we've posed in the table. In section 4, we've highlighted the biggest spending area of our budget, and that's waste transport and disposal. And the key point here is that residual waste accounts for 67% of all our spending. And given that the vast majority of the rest of the budget is things like depreciation and financing, it really highlights why the strategic focus is on delivering savings by reducing residual waste.
Thank you. Jay, could we just pause a minute? Philip's got his hand up. On
just a basic thing, really. When you're talking through the report, would you mind just mentioning the page number? It's tricky flicking through on a laptop and fun to go off on what you're talking about. So just a request, please, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. So that's one of the point on section 4 on page 9 is that there are risks around the borough waste forecasts. And what I've done in sections 4.7 and 4.9 on pages 9 and 10 is provided some sensitivity analysis, and these give a flavour of how much better or worse the cost impacts will be should those actual waste volumes be something different. And once again, the scale of these highlights the significance of even small reductions in the overall volume of residual waste. Moving on to sections 5, 6 and 7. Now these are for depreciation, financing and premises costs, and what these sections highlight is that all of these relate to the costs of the circ and costs of the transfer stations, and the movement between years is largely to do with things like accounting valuations and long-term arrangements and pricing arrangements such as loan agreements. Section 8 then highlights our employee costs, and that's on page 11 and 12. And what we're seeing here is the small growth in costs, which is made up of a growth in the establishment to deliver the business plan activities. And that growth is partly offset by savings in the pension costs. I should add that since writing this report, we've had the spending review, and what we'll be doing is the spending review says that there's going to be no public sector pay rise in 21-22, and we'll strip out that spend from this budget, so that will bring it down by £65,000. Section 9 then summarises the supplies and services budget. This is largely for our waste minimisation activities and our services such as insurance and SLAs we have for a variety of different services that boroughs deliver to us. Sections 10 and 11 then explain the revenue funding of debt and concession accounting adjustments, and they're on pages 12 and 13. And these charges and adjustments are really made to comply with various accounting requirements. For the revenue funding of debt, this ensures that all our capital purchases are funded through the levies, and that's a SIPFA requirement. And for concession accounting, the adjustment essentially unravels the PPP arrangement to show it as a mechanism of financing the asset, so it strips out financing costs. Moving on to section 12, which is on page 13 and 14. This provides a summary of the growth and the savings between the current year and 21-22. And as you'll see on the tables in 12.5 and 12.6, the main components relate to waste transport and disposal. I've also separated out on page 15 in section 12.7 those movements that result from historic strategic decisions like financing costs and depreciation. Section 13, still on page 15 and 16, then breaks down the spending into a little bit more detail, and it identifies the 3 different components of spending that we have. And this was something that we agreed following consultation with boroughs for 2021, the current year. And they result in the levies, which are identified or summarised in section 14 on page 16. And this explains that the 3 splits of spending are the basis of the charging, and that seems to work pretty well this year. In section 16, I go on to provide a little bit more detail about each of those areas. And section 15 is on page 16 and 17. Section 15 provides the PAYT rates and tonnages for the coming year, and it summarises the PAYT charges in section 15.6. And the key point to note here is that boroughs will only pay for the waste that they dispose of, and will make sure that quarterly reconciliations take place and that adjusting credits or payments tie up to make sure that that is the case. There's no changes planned to the PAYT levy approach for this year. Section 16 then goes on to provide the FCL charge for the year. That relates largely to the HRRC disposal costs, overheads and fixed costs such as depreciation. And there's only one minor tweak proposed for the coming year, and that's in response to feedback from borough finance directors and finance teams last year. They wanted us to use the actual council tax base, the final approved one, to apportion those costs. They felt that that would provide a more truer picture, truer share of the costs, and we'll do that this year. In section 17 for other income, what we're looking to do here is introduce charges for some of those hard to treat materials, difficult to treat materials, so charges to commercial customers. And we also want to be responsive to the market. So what we're requesting in this section is delegated authority for the Treasurer to make changes in year should the need arise. Section 18 then highlights the capital requirements for the coming year.
Okay, could we pause there, because that's the whole of the revenue sort of section of the accounts, just to see if there's any questions on the revenue side. It's quite an important part really, because it's quite a major expenditure for local authorities. Philip.
Thank you. Yes, just looking at the savings identified, I just wonder how it works in terms of road testing those for robustness, and what our level of confidence is around those figures that are appearing in the report, please.
Yeah, so in terms of, we go through a process of justification of budgets within the authority. Budget managers have to put forward their bids for their spending plans for the coming year. That is then scrutinised by a senior management team. Then the proposals come to a budget challenge session with the chair and the vice chair and all of the chief officers. And once again, there is further scrutiny, and throughout that entire process, there is challenge and there are adjustments and changes. So we've got quite a good level of confidence in terms of those savings in terms of most of the activities. What I'd say is that the area where there is probably the greatest amount of risk is around waste transport and waste volume forecasting, and that's where we are reliant on the borough forecasts for the tonnages. And I think that that risk is mitigated to a large extent because we operate the pay-as-you-throw mechanism, so boroughs will only pay for the tonnages they dispose of. The other thing I'd add is that the track record that we have in terms of budget monitoring and delivering performance against budget is pretty good, over a number of years. So historically, we've largely delivered what we've said we'd deliver. So I think both of those give me confidence in saying that the targets that we're setting are pretty realistic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next hand up was Mick.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, it's just a question regarding, again, on the savings table regarding the pension savings. It says reduce pension costs. What's the source of those?
Okay, every 3 years there's a valuation of the pension fund, and the latest valuation indicated that we no longer were required to pay a lump sum each year. Historically, we've always paid around £150,000–160,000 as a lump sum each year as part of the pension valuation conclusion. But the latest valuation showed our position to be better than previously, and that resulted in the removal of that lump sum. I've got to add that pension valuations bounce up and down. Yeah. We've seen that historically, and in 2 years' time, when the next valuation takes place, it might bounce back up again, and we might need to think about opportunities such as lump sum payments in order to try and, over the longer term, manage any of that risk away in terms of pensions. And the final thing I'd add is that in overall terms, spending on employment is a fairly small portion of our overall budget, so it doesn't have a huge impact on the strategic picture.
Okay, thank you very much, that's helpful.
Thank you, Mick. And Guy.
Thank you, Chair. We've talked a lot in our meetings recently about risk, in particular risk arising from good old Uncle COVID, and from equally charming Uncle Brexit. So have we particularly Uncle No Deal Brexit? So have we factored those risks in, and what would have we thought about what the impact might be on the finances if those things go as they might?
Yes, I mean, I think everyone recognises these are very large risks, and that to a fair extent they're hard to predict. We have gone through a range of activities to unravel what those risks are, and they're identified in our risk register, and it's something that we review and look at regularly. In terms of the budgeting process, the way that we manage and handle that risk is through the reserves, and you'll see in section, if I can find it, in the reserves section, which is section 19, that I flag up the range of risks that the authority is facing, and within there we've got some set aside for Brexit, principally on the basis that the key consequence for the authority will be financial, and we're setting aside sums in order to deal with those financial consequences. So yes, indeed, Brexit is allowed for within that section. In terms of the pandemic risks, to a large extent, they're allowed for in the waste volume forecasting that's been undertaken by both the boroughs, our borough colleagues and ourselves, and have been used in the preparation of the waste transport and disposal costs. And that's why I've included the sensitivity analysis in the report earlier, just to give you a flavour of what it would mean should those volumes be lower than they are predicted to be. Okay, does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, good answer. Thank you very much.
It's going to be a challenging time, is what we say. Thank you very much. Oh, Mick, you've put, is you an old hand or a new hand?
It's a new hand. It's regarding depreciation. If I can ask a quick question on that. Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, just going back to the hang on, find the page number. The original chart highlights the depreciation. There was a slightly larger than expected depreciation figure in terms of the forecasts. I noticed there's under section 5, there's a little bit of an explanation behind it. I was wondering if you could give us a bit more information about why it was so much higher, and also whether we've got future proofing regarding it adjusting again in future as such. Similar bit to the pensions question, I suppose.
Okay, I think with depreciation, there's 2 parts to it. Okay, the good news is that most of our depreciation relates to one significant asset, which is the CIRC, and the life of that arrangement is 25 years. And over the 25 years, that will smoothly erode down to 0. So the depreciation figure will be fairly consistent. However, so that's over the long term. However, between years, what tends to take place are valuations, and our auditors are very keen on ensuring that fair values and assessments take place, and we do carry out an indexation exercise to ensure that we comply with the various accounting requirements. And what this tends to do is it tends to make the valuation bounce up and down within the 5-year period, and this just happens to be one of those years where last year's valuation has resulted in a little jump up, but over a 5-year cycle it should be fairly consistent over each 5-year cycle, and the level of depreciation should be fairly stable over the long term. And our long-term plan, which you see charts in Appendix 1, sort of indicates that is fairly pretty nice slope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. There's no questions any further on the revenue side. So, Jay, did you want to move into the capital area, which is, I'm trying to find the page number myself now.
Yes, a long report. It's yeah, I'll just get back there.
It's on page 19.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Okay, so in terms of the capital side, and really the key item here is the additional capital sum for the Victoria Road improvement. Originally, we had £1 million set aside there for principally just food waste handling, but reviewing this, the position, that facility and that site can do a lot more. So that additional £1 million is to allow things like segregation of materials, material handling, and in due course, proper business plans will be put forward to demonstrate what that capital sum will do. So at this stage, it's just saying there's more we can do. Going to set aside £1 million for the bulking shed, and business plans will be forthcoming in due course. Section 20.
Jay, just on that point, we can put the money in the budget. I understand that because we do this all the time as local authorities. When will the business cases be coming back? And we need, because we don't want to proceed too far into commitments before being signed off by the board. So we can sign off putting the money into the capital programme, but to proceed with it, I think we need to sort of have a discussion to whether the direction of travel with that sort of facility is a key facility for the authority, you see.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and yes, in terms of timescales, I'll let Peter and Emma chip in due course. But what happens in terms of the budgeting process? We set aside the sums, and every year we'll review whether those sums are still necessary, and where we think the justification isn't strong enough, those sums will be wiped out. And in previous budgets, we've eliminated capital budgets as well. Yeah. Through the challenge sessions and through through discussion about these budgets, it's clear that this site can do a lot more for strategically for a number of boroughs and for the authority. And this is about optimising what we use Victoria Road for, and plans and a proper business plan will be coming forwards in the coming year. The timing of that is at the moment uncertain, but hopefully Peter and Emma can chip in and give me provide a little bit more information there about timing.
Peter, did you want to answer that part of the question?
Sorry, yes, I was just going to pick up on that. We've got some meetings arranged, or arranging some meetings in Q1 next year with all of the boroughs to go through the opportunities and risks that are likely to come out of extended producer responsibility, deposit return schemes and consistency of collection. Those meetings are likely to form part of the basis for those business cases. So I would expect the business cases to follow that after Q1 next year in those meetings, addressing what those opportunities and risks are likely to be.
So we're not moving anything forward at this moment, but I just think we haven't got that sort of high level direction of what we want to do with the site. I understand what Peter's saying. We know it's a changing environment about producer responsibility legislation that's coming through. But it's a nice site, and I just wanted to know if we're going to spend £1 million on it, it then commits us to a direction of travel. Can we sort of have a discussion around at one of our future meetings somewhere around the role of sites or the use of sites going forward? Just to sort of direction of travel, you know, to see what we want to really prioritise. I understand what you're saying, Peter, that we need the bulking facilities there, but then we might have some other uses, and then, you know, the design will be slightly different. So we don't want to rule out things, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely.
Just to shape that discussion. So we'll note that anyway. We'll note that part of it, because it is quite a major expenditure, isn't it? I know we spent more than that on buying the site out of different places, and you know, we've managed that. So it is good that we make the best use of it going forwards. Excellent. The other parts of the capital programme, I think, are things that we've identified before through reports and are quite necessary to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
Should I move on to section 19?
Yes, if you could.
Okay, section 19, as I sort of highlighted earlier, is the reserve position for next year, and really two things to say here. Firstly, the 3 million is set aside for the food waste initiatives. It's there, ready to draw down by boroughs as they progress their projects. So we're keen to see that happen. Secondly, given the COVID and Brexit risks we've talked about already, the recommendation is that we adopt a cautious approach next year and retain all reserves. And once again, we can review that position once we've got the other side of the pandemic. Section 20 then, which is on page 22, then summarises and puts the budget into context by looking at the longer term picture. And accompanying section 20 is Appendix 1, which can be found on pages 24, 25 and 26. And I won't go into detail about those, other than to say that they give a very good platform for delivering the business plan and a strong financial outlook. And most importantly, I just want to highlight the key point right at the very end of that appendix. And what I'm trying to say in that final sentence is that even a small 1% reduction in residual waste each year will be enough to wipe out the impact of inflation, and what that will mean is that levies will go down year on year. So I'm just trying to drive home the message about residual waste, which you're already familiar with anyway. But that's where I'll finish in terms of the strategic thought, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jay. Philip.
Thank you. Yes, you touched on the food waste money. Can I just clarify? I understand the ball's in West Waste Court in terms of allocating that. Is that right? Because you seem to imply that local authorities need only ask for it now with the business case. What's the position in terms of the availability of that money, please?
In terms of the availability of the money, Pete, are you able to help with that one?
Hello, yeah, can do. So the funding was signed off previously by the West London Waste Authority Board, and the business cases have been were put forward as part of that. We're currently working with all of the boroughs to move those projects and those business cases forward as fast as possible. I believe there's been a couple of advances, specifically in Hillingdon, around the opportunities for delivering that as soon as possible. So that funding is available for the boroughs to move forward. We're in the process of looking at the joint procurement work to enable those to go ahead, but that funding is available for the boroughs. So the ball's in the boroughs' court then, not West Waste then? It's to get the projects moving really, and get the funding flowing. Yes.
That's for clarifying. Thank you.
Jay, you wanted to come back on that point?
Yeah, I just want to add that, in terms of due diligence, we need to make sure that all the projects are rubber stamped and are going to go ahead, and we've got something to back up the payment with. So from my perspective, it's just making sure that all of that follows through, and then we can release the payments.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. Julia.
Hi, thank you. Yes, it's just on the appendix and the medium to longer term forecast. And I'm just curious as to how far population growth is taken into account, or is it just that households naturally are expected to dispose of more? Because that would have an effect. If we're trying to seek a percentage drop in residual waste, then actually the work needed to reduce it is even more than we think if we're building all these houses that we're supposed to build and the population is growing slightly. So it was just whether that population growth is potentially a factor.
No, that's a good point, and at present there is no population growth factored into that model, and you're absolutely right that in terms of increasing number of households, it will have an impact. The model's not sophisticated enough to take into account reductions in the various switches between different waste streams, and that's something that we're looking to develop over the coming year. With things like EPR coming online, we need to start being able to understand the implications in far more granular detail, and that's part of the work that we're planning for next year.
Yeah, I suppose if we do have to think about new development, at least we get a chance to get really good waste and recycling facilities, hopefully, when new builds come on, so we can tackle the food waste question in new development anyway. Yeah, food for thought.
Yeah.
It is food for thought, really, but I think some of the changes that are coming in, that Emma's going to highlight later on in the reports, will show, that with the legislation changing, the recycling rates changing, and what can be recycled and reduced in waste, will also have an impact on some of these financial targets. I'll say it's targets because if we go over it, it costs us a lot of money. So thank you very much, Jay. So the recommendation on the report, I always lose these, is that we agreed this one, don't we? Recommended we note the budget consultation with the borough. So the recommendations are on page 7. Are they all agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Excellent. So we now move on to page 27. Trying to do things that the screen isn't very good, which is the contracts and operations update. And I think that is Peter, isn't it?
It's myself, Chair. Tom.
Oh, sorry, Tom. It's Tom.
No problem. Thank you. I will move through this one fairly swiftly, if I may, Chair. The report is on pages 27 to 29. In summary, all contracts are performing well. The only issues I would draw your attention to is with the Suez contracts, as described on page 27. We've had a low-level noise complaint from CERC, but Suez is managing this with South Gloucestershire Council, so it's really just to flag that one to make you aware, but it is being dealt with. The other issue to note is that we're seeing an increase in waste flows across all contracts. And as a result of this, there are, of course, budgetary implications, which we've alluded to in the budget for next year, but this is also picked up in the budget monitoring report for this year, the impact of those. So in summary, all contracts performing well, just those issues to note. We're making some good progress in a number of areas. To note, particularly on the Suez contract, we've got an exciting program of upgrades at the transfer stations to increase flows and efficiency, described there on page 27. So yeah, these are rather than wholesale changes to layouts of the sites, these are changes to the way the sites work in order to get waste flow faster and more efficiently. At the Abbey Road site, which is the household reuse and recycling centre of Brent, that West London Waste operates on behalf of Brent. We're continuing to see some good, strong cultural changes and physical improvements there at the site, so that programme is progressing well. And on health and safety, we've improved COVID controls at the Abbey Road site and also introduced a new hazard reporting system, which is going well as well. So those are the main points I wanted to draw attention to, Chair, and the report is for noting.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions on the report? It's quite straightforward. We've been through a number of contracts anyway, from negotiations over the past few years, so they seem to be working as we agreed they would work. So the recommendation is that we note the information within this report. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Noted.
Excellent. We now move to the procurement update, which is on page 31. I'm going to mix up who does this one now. That's you again, isn't it, Tom? No?
This is Beth.
Beth.
Hi.
I'm mixing everyone up this morning, sorry.
Honestly, don't worry, it's not a problem. So the procurement update that you've been provided with contains two documents, the Procurement Rules and also the Procurement Operating Procedures. So just to remind you, back in the June Authority meeting, we approved the procurement authorisation tables, and they map out the different threshold levels. We separated those tables into two different tables, which is a difference from the 2016 rules that we were updating. And that's due to the differing ODU thresholds. We also created a procurement review board who it now adds in an extra level of decision making. And the other major change is that officers within West London create business cases for procurements, which are taken to the board. So the two documents that you have in front of you are the procurement rules, which are an upward-facing document, and these include the principles, the rules and the objectives, and they provide the context around the authorisation tables, and these are which we are asking for your approval. The second document is the Procurement Operating Procedures, and this is more of an officer-facing document, and it provides a lot of detail on the processes and the procedures. It's more of an internal document, and it's something that we'd use more for training material for inducting new employees, but it provides a guide to internal officers as to what the procurement procedures are. This is also, so that document's also provided in the report for reference. The main changes are that the document is easier to follow and it's a lot more succinct, and there's a lot more detail about the roles and responsibilities of the different levels of authorisation within the procurement process, and it includes details about the role of the Procurement Review Board. There's also a section included now on extensions and variations, and the section on waivers has been improved quite significantly. The only other comment I was just going to make was obviously in view of Brexit, from the 31st of December there will be some changes, and we will need to tweak the procurement rules at the end of that transition period. But they won't be, it'll be more of an update on the terminology in the procurement rules rather than anything more significant, because the thresholds will remain the same, but we'll be replacing ODU with the Find a Tender service. That will be the new name, and that'll be run by the Cabinet Office. But as I said, the thresholds will remain the same. It's just a slight difference in terminology. They're using words like launch and finalise a tender, so we would just need to make some relatively minor changes to these rules.
Thank you, Beth. Is there any questions on the report itself? No, sir. So we might be coming back next year to alter them again with the new guidance that comes out from the Brexit negotiations.
Well, I'm hoping it might be earlier than next year.
Well, we always live in hope. The recommendations are on page 31, which is do we agree to change to the procurement rules? Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Excellent.
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move on to item number 7, which is projects and waste minimisation update, which is on page 63. I've got to try and find page 63. Is that you, Peter?
That is me, Graham. Thank you. So the contents of this paper are for the authority to note, and I'll run through what we've got. In terms of the projects overall, we're continuing with our data-driven approach to identifying efficiency or potential efficiencies within the whole system across collections and disposal. The areas of data that we're specifically focusing on at the moment are around the waste data flow and reporting for near live dashboards, including giving that information and access to it for the boroughs. HRC resource and performance, and I'll move on to some of the specific projects in that shortly. Some information around routing on collections and looking at trying to streamline some of the, or help to streamline some of the borough collections. Waste composition, specifically around the food waste services and projects that we're looking at and how we're going to be measuring that moving forwards. And then generally around some of the other market and legislative drivers that we're expecting to come along that we've already mentioned around extended producer responsibility and deposit return scheme and consistency. So currently the joint working focus within the projects team, the primary focus for the next 12 months is going to be around delivering the food waste projects, as we've already discussed. This is a key factor for both budget as well as recycling and residual waste reduction performance. It's going to make a big difference, and as we've discussed, we've already signed off on the funding. That's through being managed through continual engagement with the environment directors, and we're looking to pull together a dashboard that's going to easily demonstrate and measure the performance on those projects. Some of the other joint working around the HRRCs in the area, we're looking at trying to leverage some of the joint procurement opportunities for specific materials, as well as some of the consumables around fuel, but also looking at potential for area-wide staffing cover, looking at how we're utilising agency or overtime, and where the opportunities are around some of the potential circular economy areas for reuse, and some of the other bits that have been mentioned through authority meetings in terms of library of things. We are also looking at some cost-saving measures on those on sites as well, with projects for energy and generally carbon reduction, and we're going to be looking at those over the next 12 months as well. So the waste minimisation team have been mainly based at Abbey Road, looking at the circular economy projects there with regard to textiles and the potential reuse options as well. And the projects team, in addition, are looking at some of the opportunities around the consistency of collection services, as well as some consultancy services on collections as well. In terms of risk, we've identified a couple of risks that have come up since the last meeting. The one that's potentially a big change in 2030 around not having internal combustion engine vehicles being sold new, so that could have a big impact on potential collection fleets moving forwards, and that's anywhere between a 7 and a 10-year cycle for vehicles, so it's something that we need to be considering in the shorter term. Moving on, the Annex 1 really covers off some of the timelines we're looking at in terms of getting some of the joint working projects, especially the HRRCs, going, and identifying some of the savings and offering those over to the boroughs. And that's the end of the report.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Is there any questions on the report? No, I think just going back to your one on risk, Peter, around the vehicle collection fleets. I think most vehicle fleets across local government and even on the collection of waste from these stations are moving to electric vehicles. It's those 28-ton collection vehicles they got to look at, isn't it? That's the one we're talking about here.
There are a wide number of options, and electrification is one. There are a number of knock-on impacts from those, but yes, that is an option. We've already looked at some renewable fuel options. So within our food waste contract at the moment, we've got the collection vehicles that are picking up from the transfer stations powered by the gas that's generated from the anaerobic digesters. That's not carbon zero, but we are looking at some of those options and where we can go before 2030, yes.
Thank you very much. So the recommendations is to note the information report. Is it noted?
Noted.
We now move to the budget monitoring report for period 7, which is up to October, which is on page 67.
Thank you, Chair. This will be familiar to members. The pattern of this report and the spending and the KPIs this report shows is very comparable to previous budget monitoring reports, and the information that Tom provides in the weekly waste summaries. The only variance to note that is new relates to a share of the insurance premium that we have to pay in relation to the CERC as part of the PPP contract. There's a risk sharing arrangement where the premiums are in excess of a certain level. We pay the lion's share. Up to that level, the contractor pays the lion's share, and that's resulted. A recent review of the premiums has resulted in a £600,000 additional cost to our supplies and services budget, which is the variance in the first table. The rest of it is as per usual, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jay. Is there any questions on the report? And we do have regular updates on the finances, and we've seen, as you say, the waste flows. So we do see the impact, and we're well within where we thought we would be, which is good from your side, Jay. The projections and risk, it's all well managed. So thank you. The recommendations are on page 67, I think, which is note the financial position forecast at 2021, which Jay's spoken about, and note the KPIs. And we didn't have any decisions under scheme of delegation. Is that all agreed?
Agreed.
We now move to page 73, which is the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy Update. Very long title.
Thank you, Chair. So West London Waste and boroughs have had a joint municipal waste management strategy since 2005. And since 2017, we've been reviewing it much more frequently and keeping it updated in line of new and emerging legislation that's coming forward. So this new strategy starts from 2020, and it's an evolving strategy because of the amount of change that we're adapting to as we go. So this update focuses very much on carbon and climate emergency. There's a lot of strands to the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy, and I've taken the opportunity this time to be quite focused on that key issue. So just as a reminder, in September 2019, we had a West London Waste Authority meeting and discussed the strategic outcomes that were wanted. And one of them, as you'll be able to see, the second bullet point, our climate emergency response is to focus on no more waste. The Borough Environment Directors held a Future Vision workshop in October 2019, and the outcomes there have also been included into our strategic thinking, and a number of these outcomes are relevant in the climate emergency response, but obviously you'll see a key one is carbon neutral by 2030, and that wider policy context is the sort of long-term aims: carbon neutral by 2030, 65% recycling by 2035, 2030 is the GLA target, net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and zero vehicle emissions by 2050. So just in a little bit more detail on the climate emergency response and the reason why our focus is no more waste. We have a waste hierarchy, and we've been working to this waste hierarchy for quite a long time. And at the top of the waste hierarchy is reducing waste, reusing materials. And one of the new areas that we're focusing on quite strongly going forward is circular economy. Because waste reduction is the biggest decarbonisation activity that we can undertake. It doesn't sit in our direct emissions, but the emissions from wasted consumption, wasted production, dwarf our direct emissions as a body. And so we see this as being really key in assisting others to achieve their climate emergency responses. In addition, there are some reports that have been really have been getting us thinking from the UK Resources Council, which indicate that for every £1 invested in circular economy projects, then there's potentially £2.40 social value that can be realised. And we would like to use some of these projects to understand and demonstrate how that can be achieved in West London. It's even more important now with green recovery and the impact of COVID on our communities. So increasing recycling is an area that we have been working on for a long time, and there's an economic blocker at the moment with recycling, and that's going to be unblocked with things like the plastics tax and extended producer responsibility. Peter's talked a fair bit about and Jay actually have talked a fair bit about the food waste projects and the investment that we've put into that, and that's something that we can work on right now. And the further we get with that right now, the more that we'll be able to focus on the recycling when EPR comes and the circular economy projects in the long term. So just a little focus on energy from waste. Members will probably have seen some of the discussions in the press and some of the campaign groups that are challenging the use of energy from waste. And it's really important that we see energy from waste as being a part of our decarbonisation programme. So we've taken waste out of landfill and moved it into energy from waste, recycling, composting, and in fact, we've got rid of it. So that has been a big decarbonisation programme already. The next phase of our decarbonisation programme is removing materials from energy from waste, and there will be some materials that we want to remove faster because they're fossil and therefore they have a carbon impact, and there'll be some materials that there isn't really anywhere else for them to go yet, and others are working on what to do with those materials. The key point is that this is going to have an impact on people, on individuals, on what they're throwing away. We're going to be asking them to recycle better, recycle more, and to understand some of these key issues about fossil carbon, non-bioplastics, for example. It's a fair bit more complexity that is heading the way of the householder. I've got a presentation in the appendix, so I'll go into a little bit more detail in that. Just in terms of timing, the Environment Bill is in the committee stage in the House of Commons right now. The consultations on the regulations that relate to consistency, extended producer responsibility and deposit return schemes are expected in March 2021. So we will have sight of the legislation quite soon, and the legislation is expected to take effect from 2023. And that's why Peter and Jay are talking about getting ready for EPR and DRS, because that's something that we'll be able to move on quite soon. So if I take you to the appendix, which is in page 70, actually I'll go to the second appendix, which is a presentation, page 77, and then the first slide is page 78. So this graph shows that long-term carbon reduction plan. It very starkly shows waste that goes to landfill, waste that does not go to landfill. And you can see that West London Waste has been extremely successful in getting waste out of landfill, and that's reflected in Tom's contracts update with the key KPIs on diversion from landfill. On the second slide, which shows the recycling trends, this is the same graph, but looked at differently. So this is the difference between rubbish and recycling and composting. And what you can see is that the amount of waste that's recycled and composted just goes flat. And this indicates that it's actually an economic issue. The drivers, the economic drivers, are not there to get the waste out of wherever it's going as rubbish. And there's a number of reasons for this. Non-recyclable. Sometimes some of the packaging and things that come through our household streams are very difficult to recycle. And sometimes they're very expensive to recycle. But also we have to remember things like the oil. When the oil price crashed in 2014, at that point it becomes much cheaper to use oil plastic than recycled plastic. And so there's all sorts of those sort of things that are pulling on us at the same time. So EPR, DRS, the consistency work that we're expecting to see soon is expected to unlock all of that. And the final slide on page 80, this converts from total waste into per capita. So this answers in part the question that was asked earlier about numbers of households. So we look at not just how much waste is coming through, but we also look at per household or per capita, how much people are throwing away, and we're looking for reductions in that as well. So you can see over the period of the first joint strategy, the amount of waste is reduced by a third, and this is a fantastic good news story. When people talk about flatlining recycling rates, really they should be taking into account the success of waste reduction at the same time in order to see that positive story. The key message though for you is if you look at the very last bar, the target bar, it flips it inverts that last bar, and that's in effect what we have to do to get to 65% recycling. So for each householder, in effect, we're going to ask them half your rubbish, double your recycling, and that is a very big change. So if I could take you back up to Appendix 1, the carbon key messages, I have set out some carbon key messages that I hope will be helpful to answer questions that come from other people who don't necessarily have the benefit of some of these quite detailed discussions that we have about waste. I've gone through most of these key messages in presenting the report, so I won't read them out again, but this is in effect what we're asking for you to approve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. This is an important area of work for the authority, because as you looked through the budget structure earlier on, that's one area. You know, the J set out that the rising costs of waste disposal could, you know, sort of give us a lot of financial challenges. But on the converse side of it all, it's an important pace for us to actually want to sort of meet those climate change targets a lot earlier than you know, than we plan to, and when we have opportunities to do that. In a moment, I'll ask Paul Walker if he wants to say a few words about some of the things the directors are doing, supported with the West London Waste Authority. But I would get, we should sort of highlight a few that we're actually doing ourselves. You know, we've agreed as a board to spend £3 million on food waste. Now, this isn't to say we just increased the food waste collected, it's taking it out of other waste streams, which makes a marked environmental change. In effect, as something I normally say to Emma, the best opportunity be is if we didn't throw anything away at all. You know, that's probably what we should be aiming for. We also should need to remind ourselves that when we look at recycling, when we used to look at percentage recycling, it was when you had heavy items going through the waste streams like glass and newspapers was a heavy one, and they've slowly disappeared out of the system. So it isn't around just increasing recycling to that extent, it's about reducing residual waste overall is where we can make the most impact, because if we can take it out altogether or stop it going into the waste stream, we're far better off. So it goes back to Julia's point earlier on about a rising number of population. What we don't want is a corresponding increase in waste. There's no need for it in essence. It's about, you know, reducing waste per person, but also recycling wherever we can, and then how we dispose of it at the end. So some of it can be reused, and that's another element of the waste stream. Paul, I don't know if you want to, if you're there. Paul Walker. Yeah. Did you want to quickly go through some of the work you're doing with the West London Waste Authority as directors within authorities?
Yeah, I'm happy to do. Thanks, Graham. I think the first thing is just to kind of build on Emma's presentation is around the lead role that Harrow's taking across West London about reducing consumption emissions. And it's doing that just as Harrow being the lead to bring people together and coordinate activity. It's very much a healthy partnership with West London Waste, with Suez and with the other boroughs across London to achieve this target of reducing our consumption emissions by 2/3 by 2030. And that's very much embedded and grounded in the work that Emma's talked about in terms of the carbon emissions ultimately included in the cost and the impact of disposing of the food and clothes and goods and services that we are essentially consuming, and the energy and transport that's needed to make them the consumption emissions that are generated, and how do we ultimately deal with that. And we do that across both the local authorities, the Waste Authority, our private sector partners, LWARB and the other boroughs. So that's an exciting opportunity, and I think as we progress that, we'd like to bring a presentation about what that means and how we're progressing that back to the board, so that we understand that role and how we're taking it forward, and how we all have a role to play. Now, it essentially beautifully fits and aligns with the overall strategy that Emma's talked to us about. But as part of that, on a practical level, the environment directors, together with the West London Climate Emergency Officers, have really risen to the challenge in terms of the work that needs to be done, and really pleased with progress there, not just in terms of things that are practically being done, but the collaborative working that's taking place And that's not just on an ad hoc basis. That's new relationships which have been formed over recent months with climate officers who like-minded are working in a specific area, and also environment directors who are taking the lead across West London on anything from our Green Homes Grant initiative and submitting fund bids, which we have been successful around Ealing, our lead authority for that, for the decarbonisation of the first 200 homes across West London. We were awarded the biggest bid in the UK and the most substantial bid, invited to submit a second bid over the next few weeks to improve and increase the number of homes which will be advanced through the cash that's coming through. But from that, the spin-off opportunities in terms of skills development and the work with our local colleges across West London, so that the curricula within colleges can be expanded to include the work that's needed to develop skills around decarbonisation and the work that needs to happen in terms of removing those gas-fired boilers from those homes, and how do we move to heat source pumps, and how do we put insulation into those homes when we address issues around fuel poverty. And that's not something that's done on its own, it's done by a number of boroughs. But at the same front, in terms of those things which are within our gift, like procurement, we all spend millions on services. Let's make sure and get assurance that our suppliers are carbon neutral, they're working towards carbon neutrality, and working with a range of suppliers who are contributing to that particular work. Again, we've got a team who are working together to bring that together and make it happen, and progressing really well, exciting opportunities. And moving on from that, in terms of the emissions framework that's been put together, a consistent model which brings together the best from government thinking and the LGA as to how we measure our emissions, and we have a consistent approach across West London and London as a whole. So just three immediate things that are happening from a West London basis, but that doesn't take anything away from the strong borough work that's happening within individual boroughs themselves, where learning's being shared across individual boroughs and activity strengthened and put in place, whether that's around solar initiatives, whether that's around transport, whether that's around LED lighting. All of that, we're reaping the benefit of people coming together and sharing what's working well in one area and being transformed into other areas. And, one of the things I've talked to both Emma and Graham about is that in the new year that we bring that work back to you and align it to the strategy that Emma's talked about, so you can see for yourself those things that are happening and how they dovetail, and make the approach that the board's adopting, broader and deeper in terms of its reach and impact. Because at the end of this, it's all about the impact of that work, not just the impact in an individual borough, but the impact across the boroughs. And I think ultimately what really strengthens this is the boroughs and the Waste Authority coming together in that work, and how the impact of decisions by boroughs impacts on the work of the Waste Authority, and vice versa, and having the conversations and debates to make sure we get the strongest outcome, which gives us that win-win scenario for both. So that'd be something for the future, Graham, from a combination of both the informal meetings and the formal board meetings, to develop the strategy, to develop the thinking, and I think ultimately raise the awareness and understanding of board members, so that they can also challenge that work that's happening within their own individual boroughs and contribute to that becoming more effective for West London as a whole. And I'll leave it there and pause there, Graham. I think you're on mute, Graham.
You're on mute, but I'm sure I saw your lips saying that you're inviting me to ask a question. Sorry, that was very cheeky of me. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on Paul's points and fly the flag a little bit for Richmond, who put in their own little bid for the Green Home Grant, which was also successful, and we've just put in a follow-up one. But just to pick up on that point, it's not just the formal bids that you make, it's also the sharing of information informally. And I know our climate policy officer has been working across borough boundaries, and it is about having a united and determined focus to achieve things together. So I'm hoping that will continue, and just to support the approach, really. Thank you.
Yeah, I think very much continue, Julia, that I think we're really starting to reap the benefits of those relationships and people working not just within their own borough, but across the range of boroughs.
Excellent. Krupa. You're on mute and your camera's off.
Sorry, yeah, I know my laptop's been so funny over these past few weeks. No, I just wanted to say, really support all this. Just one thing I want to know. So I know we're working really well across the boroughs with Western and Waste Alliance, but I just wanted to know if we're looking to see what the other West Alliance and Waste Alliances are doing across London and what the London Waste and Recycling Board are doing as well, and whether we're taking any ideas aboard from them or seeing any good practices that they're following as well.
If I may, if I kick that answer off, and I know Emma perhaps come in on the back of that, I think, you know, we're really pleased with the progress that we've made, and you know, in all modesty, you know, the other parts of London are looking across to the west to see what's happening and how things are done, the relationships which have been developed, the interrelationship between the boroughs and the waste authorities and how that's working. How do you make that successful? And we are taking that learning and how we work back to the other boroughs through the LEDNet initiative and through the tech group. So we're very much sharing the work that we've done and giving other boroughs and the other waste authorities the opportunities to learn from that. And I think that's probably potentially the next stage in the development of this, that we take more of that forward across London as a whole. There are opportunities to do that now. There will be opportunities in future, you know, not least of which are our approach around extended producer responsibility. And as boroughs, we want to do, you know, have a single plan, and that's ultimately our objective, not necessarily 7 individual plans, but how do we get to that position? How have we got to the position where, you know, we're seen as one team with boroughs and the waste authority, and how we do things and how we bring things together? And we have an integrated resource that works to support different initiatives. And to be fair to Emma, that's very much around Emma's style of leadership in wanting to make things happen and build relationships. And others have seen how that might work. I'm sure Emma's got more practical examples from the Waste Authority and others.
Thank you. Yes, there wasn't much good that came out of COVID-19, but one of the good things that did come out of it was much more joined up working and a lot more trust. And we saw that joined up working at a West London level. The Strategic Waste Disposal Authorities also started to get together and discuss, just to make sure that we all were seeing the whole picture, and across all of London, and including LWARB and GLA officers as well. And so I think that some of those relationships have grown and developed much faster than they would have done otherwise. I've been talking about this difficulty between waste reduction and waste recycling, certainly in terms of waste recycling targets, for quite some time. And I've been talking to LWARB about that for quite some time. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to look at London slightly differently and to say, these are our statistics, this is what makes sense. And I think there'd be a really welcome, I think that would be welcomed by boroughs, because, for example, you know, one of the reasons why our recycling rates aren't as high as elsewhere is people have small gardens or no gardens, and the amount of green waste. And so I think, you know, we definitely have an opportunity to showcase ourselves differently, and that's all very doable now.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? I will note, though, when we were saying about our roles in other boroughs, I think Emma's on as a senior role within a national organisation around waste. Paul is heavily involved with LEDNet as well and influence there, and Krupa's involved with the London Waste Recycling Board. So we do have that, we can have those discussions and take place, and we can put those presentations into those sort of areas if we need to. I think it's a two-way conversation, and I think they can learn from us, and then when they find out what we're doing, they can sort of challenge us back. We might learn something new which we can use, which would be very useful. Emma, did you want to come back in there?
Oh, just to note, as well as the reducing consumption emissions work that Harrow's leading on, there's also the green economy work that Hounslow is leading on, and Victoria Lawson is taking a key role in that as well. And when you link those two big pan-London projects with what we're doing in West London Waste Authority, there's an awful lot of synergy and opportunity to share information. The other thing, I think, just with the Climate Emergency Officers Group, what's really nice about it is that the officer and the director leading on each strand are from different boroughs as well. And so that also works really well.
It does. Julia, you have your hand up?
Yes, it's kind of a housekeeping point, really. It was just when Emma was talking about the small gardens and no gardens. I don't think we should underestimate what an impact that has on the way Londoners recycle, perhaps compared to towns where it's normal to have a big front garden. And I had experience of this recently at my father's, who lives in a street in an area in a town where everybody has a front garden, and they have great big recycling bins. But typically in Richmond, we have small or no front gardens, so we have small containers. And it's just thinking about the impact on residents and asking more and more of residents in terms of recycling more and understanding more. It's just another aspect of it. How do you manage it when they have small containers for their recycling but a big bin that needs to be switched over? And that's all part of the logistics that we need to consider. It's managing the nitty-gritty of how we get the residents to actually do what we want them to do is an important part of making the whole thing successful. That's all.
Yes, I would agree with that. There's definitely a place for some joined up responses to the consultations, where perhaps the consultations are UK wide and we'll be looking at it in terms of people having a lot of space. And I think we need to make some quite strong representation for those people who don't. This is where a lot of the work that Peter and everybody are doing on the food waste projects is so valuable, because a lot of the focus is about understanding that voice of the customer, the resident, what's important to them in order to get the recycling that we want. And I think some of that work will translate through and help us to understand how do we set the service in a way that it actually works for the individual.
Yes, it is a challenge, and when people who introduce food waste collections, which is the most recent things, we've seen the challenges around that. But then once it's in, people embrace it very well. So it's how we communicate is a lot of the things we have to deal with. Just 2 points I'd like to make is one around the legislation on the environmental bill. This is something we've been waiting for some time, to be honest, because that sort of kicks a lot of the national programme into movement. It might be delayed or postponed because of other things going on, but we need really to be able to respond as necessary. So we might have to do some sign off some responses to that. I will say, though, that the letter that Emma wrote, so we co-wrote it a couple of years ago, is now what the government's thinking is. So maybe we did have that influence, sort of about reducing waste. So, so we have that big impact. The other one is because it's a waste strategy, is how we deal with our. Well, we used to call them the tip, didn't we? Then it was the dump, and it was the. We moved to recycling centre. And it's how do we move that conversation forward, because that is a key area of the waste strategy, because there's the amount of waste that goes through there, and how we can make better use of assets. And I think that's where I was coming from on the South Ruislip proposal about what we could do with something that's a key site and our own sites, about how we make it probably easier to dispose of recycle waste or separating waste out. But it doesn't just reduce costs, it reduces everything else as well, all the carbon and sort of environmental impacts. But if we want to come back to a conversation around that, Emma, I think that'd be moving it forward. My final point is the slides that Emma's done, I think, are really good, and sort of I think we should start trying to push them through the local government route, you know, as cabinet members in different areas. That one around the carbon key messages, I think, is quite clear and quite important, and it sort of sets the debate in the right place where we need to be. And I think it's sort of something we can do collectively across North West London, like Paul was saying, that when we work collectively as boroughs, we are moving things forward very rapidly. You know, we're not sort of, instead of arguing about someone does something better than someone else, we're sort of coordinating and supporting each other to get to where we need to be. And I think there's some very key messages in that one page that sort of could drive behaviours going forward in some areas. So is there any other questions or notes on the report? No. So the recommendations are on page, I always get my page numbers mixed up, 73, and it is that we approve the key messages on waste carbon savings, and we will start promoting it apart from the green, and we just do something with them. So we will start proactively moving them within the boroughs as well, just to make sure, you know, it's not just sitting there and sort of agreeing something, we actually do something with it. Is that okay?
Great.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That actually brings us to the end of the reports. Oh, it's just getting exciting. I haven't been notified of any other business, unless anyone's got any other business. Now, so thank you very much for your time. If we do want to make an urgent response or quick response to the legislation, then Emma will circulate by email. But thank you very much for your time for coming along today, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.